You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Welcome to today's podcast, where we have another exciting guest joining us, who's been on the program before, talking to us about the 2022 MSP Threat Report published by our friends over at ConnectWise. And they have done a study. This is their third annual study analyzing MSP security trends. And we're going to be talking to our friend Raffy, who's going to walk us through somewhat of the state of the market as it pertains to security, what trends that he has seen, as well as the rest of the ConnectWise team, and kind of what should we be picking up from this report, and how can we best arm ourselves with this information to respond moving forward. So, Raffy, welcome back to the MSP Zone. Absolutely. So this is your third annual ConnectWise ConnectWise MSP Threat Report. Talk to me a little bit about not what got you into this, but a little bit about the study and what you hope to achieve from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. Like you see so many different reports out there for cybersecurity, right? Like pretty much every company, every vendor out there has some kind of a threat report or some yearly report they put out. And what we are focusing on is really the MSP and SMB space, right? We felt like it's interesting for MSPs themselves and also for their customers to see a little bit of what's going on in the space, and helping arm our MSP partners a little bit with information on how they can go out to their customers and explain a little bit of what's happening out there, why security is relevant to them, and B, just for themselves to understand where should they make investments, what's happening, what happened last year, and how is security important to them, right? And helping them themselves prioritize security, whether they have security practice already or they're just trying to figure out if they want to stand one up, right? And so we rehashed a little bit of what was going on last year in our report, and then look at 2022 and look at a couple of the themes that we think are going to be topics that will come up in the MSP space.
Yeah. No, I mean, a really, really important body of work that you guys are creating over there. In some ways, I think, compared even to the MSP Alliance, ConnectWise and your peers are really at the cutting edge when it comes to meeting and identifying early stage MSPs, because you are equipping them with the technologies that they're going to need to do their business. And in some ways, I think that's really critical, because you're also the first point of contact to start telling them, you may want to be an MSP, but you can't ignore the security issue. How much does that come up in your kind of MSP recruitment efforts?
All the time, right? The MSPs are getting questions from their customers more and more. I'm like, hey, we just saw this news, ransomware, it's other attacks as well, right? These things are in the news every day at this point. And the MSPs get a lot of questions like, hey, what should we be doing as customers out there? How do I protect my business? What do you have to offer me? And then with the cyber insurance question, even tech EO insurance for the MSPs, it's security is becoming a requirement. Security is being talked about. Security needs to be part of the offering of the MSP, and it needs to be a topic for the MSP to secure themselves as well. And that's, again, it comes up in every conversation we have out there. And that's also why we said, we can be a vendor of products, but we also need to have a way for MSPs to learn about security and help them with the basics of, hey, here's how you secure your own house, to then get ready to start selling security services. Here is help that we get you for marketing materials to help selling into your customer base. And here's the products that we follow on and the services so that you can deliver security services to your customers. And we have this, we call this our partner program, where we guide the MSPs through that. And there is a level of the partner program that's open to anyone, whether they're a partner of ours or not, or they buy products from us or not. It's free. They get a whole bunch of resources. There's trainings in there that we offer for their business people, but also for the technicians. There's like a day-long training that they can get their technicians through to just get certified on security. It's just the basics. We're trying to help the community just get put up barriers and make it a little harder for the bad guys to wreak havoc and cause damage out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. Could you walk us through maybe some of the highlights from your vantage point? What did you see from this report this year that maybe stood out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the report itself summarizes a little bit of what happened last year, and then looks into this year of what are some of the themes coming up. So in terms of 2021, we've seen that the government has gotten much more involved in takedowns and things like that, right? It's ransomware specifically has risen to a level where it gets everybody's attention, and the government itself has been stepping in because, well, it's starting to become a inhibitor of global trade and the prosperity of companies, and that's something that the government is obviously interested in. And so they're stepping in and they're starting to take action. There's task forces and all kinds of things out there. And in the 2022 side, it's actually continuing, right? Like we're seeing more government and federal guidance. For example, the guidance on ransomware payments, like how should you react to ransomware? There's now federal guidance out there, which I think is really awesome. MSPs are starting to be regulated, right? There's more and more demands coming down for MSPs on what they have to do. And I think that's a good sign. We'll see whether we can, as a MSP community, go and drive that conversation, or the government is going to drive most of it, which I think would be a little problematic. I hope that we can have a seat at the table to help build the regulations so they're not too government heavy. There's other themes from last year was ransoms are just skyrocketing. They're getting higher and higher because, well, these crime groups, they have been successful, and they're like, well, we can ask for more. And what we'll see this year, or already last year, we've seen a lot, is that you're getting into these double extortion and triple extortion schemes where if you get a ransomware, so far your data was encrypted. And when you paid the ransom, you would generally get the decryption key. What was happening now is, well, that happens, but they also start publishing or exfiltrating your data and making it publicly available. And they're sort of the second extortion there. They're like, well, we still have your data and we're going to make it available, so pay us again. So they're just taking it to the next levels, which is really tough to deal with, right? We've seen last year some pretty high profile attacks, like the Colonial Pipeline. Probably a lot of people remember that, right?
Yep.
Which had a direct impact on a lot of things, right? Like gas prices going up and things like that. What's interesting is that we're hearing more and more from these ransomware groups that they're not going to attack the critical infrastructure anymore. I'm actually not 100% sure why that is, but I think they realize, that the disruption, they don't necessarily want to be disruptive to the population out there, right? They're like, well, we just want our money. We don't really have to cause any harm to people. We just want to go target it against the companies and get ransom, I think, right? And they probably also they're creating a little too much attention for law enforcement if they go after the big targets, and there's just enough money by not going against these very exposed targets.
Yeah.
This year we'll definitely see MSP spending more money on cyber. I'm already seeing that a lot. Business is up, which is awesome. It's obviously awesome for us, but it's also awesome for the SMBs, right? Like MSPs are making an effort to secure themselves, making it harder for the bad guys to get in, trying to stay secure. There's lots of challenges with that, right? Like the talent shortage, like as the MSP down the street, how do you get the talent in house, right? Again, that's why we're trying to offer these certification programs for free, even where you can have your techs get certified on basics of security, get them at least the basics, right? Maybe the last trend for this year that I will mention, that it's in the report as well, is the threat actors are hiding their tracks better and better. They're getting very stealthy. They're trying to evade government crackdown, right? They're like, as I mentioned last year, we have seen more of that, where the government is stepping in, but these guys are getting smart, and they're spending time and money on being non-discoverable and hiding their tracks, right? They're getting very smart about it. They're making enough money that they can afford this. Ransomware at this point is a service you can buy. It's like a company. There's support coming with it, right? And that's going to make it harder for us to obviously to block these guys, and they're going to get smarter and smarter. And when maybe antivirus was enough of a protection 2 years ago, EDR is maybe still enough right now, but I think tomorrow you have to have a better answer to how you're preventing ransomware with not just post exploitation, but a whole coverage across the entire kill chain, basically. So lots going on. Sorry, I could go on and on here. But
no, I appreciate that. I'm interested in that in your comment about the involvement of law enforcement specifically. We know the legislative front. The Singapore just passed an MSP licensing framework recently that's going into effect, I think, this month. So the legislative public policy communities seem to be moving. Law enforcement, you referenced Colonial Pipeline. We spoke to a handful of former FBI agents, and they seem to indicate that like what they don't want to happen is for people to think that, look, the FBI or government is going to get involved every single time you have a ransomware incident. And that's just not the case. Colonial Pipeline was huge. It made the headlines. It impacted gas prices. You're correct. But I wouldn't want like your partners or our members to get a false sense of, well, I will be bailed out by government. I mean, is that something that you're talking to your partners about?
No, you're absolutely correct. And I think we got to stress that, right? Like, the government is not going to, if you get ransomware on your machines, the government is not going to, you can report it, but they will not do anything about it. Unless your losses are, I forget what the limits are, but I think also different field offices of the FBI have different levels of loss when they get involved, right? Like if you're, I remember a couple of years ago, I brought a case to the FBI in San Francisco, and they're like, sorry, we have so much to do and bigger fish to fry than this couple $1 million loss for this company, right? But then I was successful with another field office, I think in Seattle, where they were like, oh, we have actually a couple cases in this area. We'll take this on and make a bigger case out of it. But yes, like what we have to understand, right, there's so much going on, and there's such large scale attacks still that they're investigating. They're not going to bail us out on these smaller cases. I think that's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the report does, and I think that the report is publicly available, correct?
Yes, it is. If you go to our website, ConnectWise.com, it's very prominently featured right there, and on the first screen you can download it there.
Okay, we'll include a link on the podcast notes so everyone can go and grab a copy. Encourage everyone to go download it and check that out. I think that there's a a silver lining in all of this, which is if we know that, most, like the vast majority of these attacks are not going to rise to the level of getting public, law enforcement involvement, at least from a federal level, we still are in a position where these battles are winnable. And I think that if we just change some behavior and we apply existing technologies, right? This is the technologies are out there, and all it takes is for MSPs to start using them and to get their customers to start adopting them. We'll be in a much better position, because you made a comment that I thought was really interesting, is that they're going downstream, the bad actors, because they don't want to have high-profile takedowns, because that's going to jeopardize them and their business model. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I think you're absolutely right. There is the technology out there to help us protect, and it's like, think of the burglar in your neighborhood, right? They like easy targets. Right? If you leave your car on the street not locked, right, then they will go and try. And, oh, great, it's open. They open it up and grab the bag and go. If your car is locked, that's already like the first deterrent, right? Are they really going to smash the window? Maybe, right? And they've gotten obviously more aggressive in these kinds of things. And you hear there's a number of cities, right? But then the next step is like, well, if you leave your house door unlocked, well, they just walk in, right? And they understand you're on vacation. If it's locked, again, are they going to break a window? Maybe not. And if you have floodlights that come on, well, they're already like, you know what? I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to go to the next house that's completely in the dark. No one is going to see me, much less risk. Same here, right? If you have no security measures, you're using default passwords, you're reusing passwords, you have old software installed in your computer, you haven't updated it, guess what? It's a walk in the park for the hacker to get in, right? And they will just try the doorknobs. Oh, old version of Windows. I know all these vulnerabilities. Poof, they're in, ransom on your machine, and that was easy for them, right? But if you patch your machines and then you also put an EDR on there, well, now you have a pretty good sense of security already. Is it going to prevent everything? No, of course not, right? A motivated attacker can still get in, but probably 90% is deterred at this point. So that's just kind of like, start with the basics, right? Start somewhere and get something out there. Have your vulnerability and patch management act together, right? The RMMs can help with that. And then figure out your endpoint security solution, and you're, 75% there or something, right? And then you layer on from there, and you can do some more. But these technologies are out there, right? And yeah, they're accessible, right?
Sure. I want to focus on a couple of the data points from the report, as well as some kind of conclusions that you arrive at, which are very interesting, and I think I largely agree with them. You say that ConnectWise is kind of predicting not only an increase in attacks, but that the shift is going to go, I don't want to say away from SMB, but you say that they're going to be going towards mid-tier, like let's say upper SMB, lower mid-market customers. Describe what that means and why MSPs need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, so one of the trends we're seeing is, like, we call them these super-MSPs, right? Like, we see that MSPs are buying others. There's a lot of M&A activity, which is fantastic. And now think about the threat actors, right? If they go against these larger MSPs, they can ask for more money, and they have access. Like if one of these super MSPs gets breached, and say, God forbid, they get into their RMM solution and are able to get ransomware and all the endpoints out there, well, there's quite a bit of money they can ask for, because now you have all these different companies that they just breached, and they can extort the MSP, but the MSP, it's really the customers that they're protecting. So there's some very interesting dynamics there of what is happening if the threat actors are going after a small company by itself. They hack the bakery down the street. They might just be like, we have no idea. We're just going to wipe the machines and get some help reinstalling everything, and they never pay the ransom. So they're starting to optimize their business, right? They're just like any any even commercial company out there, they're trying to figure out where can we make money, and they're starting to hone in on the areas where there is money available, like lucrative targets, and there is enough sophistication that these companies actually will be like, well, we have data that's really relevant. We need those decryption keys. We don't want the data to be exfiltrated, so we got to pay the ransom, right? So I think that's kind of where we're seeing this market evolve into. These threat actors are getting smart where they go after. It's almost like A/B testing that they're doing, right?
Yeah, and that they're actually trying to avoid publicity by staying under the radar, and therefore, it's like small time, organized crime, right? You do something so big, you're going to draw attention. You keep it under the radar and you keep it consistent. That's a good business model for them. I think that's really important for MSPs to hear that message.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the rate of increase. So the report, I think, concludes that there's about a 10 to 15% increase. This is last year, 2021. And about 56% of all incidents occurred in the second half of 2021. What, if any, conclusions could we draw from that?
Well, that's not stopping and it's just growing, right? I think one of the things that is probably responsible for this is that these threat actors have been active for a while. They have been. Initially, it was a very manual process for them. They pick one target, they see if their ransomware worked or their exploits worked, then deploy their ransomware, right? They're optimizing it, they're starting to build frameworks, they're starting to build entire services that scale, right, for doing large-scale attacks, and have been starting to build out these businesses where there's these infrastructure providers for ransomware as a service. And it's just, I think what's happening is that, well, there is now a lucrative business here, right? It has been successful. And we're at a state now where this stuff starts scaling, right? Suddenly it's like, okay, there's enough people that are using these platforms to extort people for ransom. And there's enough people that have interest in doing that. And the platforms are working in scale, right? So we won't see a slowdown until, I think, it's almost like a market saturation in a sense, right? Like until the businesses out there are secured to the level where they're not successful anymore, right? So if everybody had patches of had the latest versions of products deployed and they have, say, an EDR deployed, we'd probably start seeing the number of our ransoms going back down again, because it's now getting harder. And then they have to rebuild the ransomware as a service provider. They have to start figuring out, how do we get into these systems again? And we got to make their lives a little harder. So I think that's the only way we're going to start seeing that coming back down. But I don't see that happening this year. I think as MSPs, the market is getting their arms around, okay, we got to do something. There's urgency now. Let's figure out what it is. Let's get on it. Let's figure out how that looks, right? And it will take this year and probably part of next year for the MSPs to really get ready for that, get a partner lined up that can provide the right solutions to them, get them educated, and start rolling these things out, right? This stuff takes time. So I think we're just seeing this uptick right now, and it's going to go on for a little bit before it's coming back down.
So it sounds like almost like a cyber herd immunity. Like we have to have that. Yeah. It penetrate all the downstream customers before they start to present enough resistance that they say, hey, this is not a good business model anymore.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
So look, the average MSP listening to us talk and saying, oh my gosh, this is like a lot of bad news. I actually look at it as one of the biggest in 20, 30 years of the MSP profession being in existence, of the relevancy of the MSP to play a significant role in the defense of their installed managed services customers. I mean, how do your partners, maybe the existing matured ones who've been with ConnectWise for many years, and also the ones that are just getting equipped, just starting out their managed services practice, are there any differences between how those two groups are responding to this type of news?
I think so, right? The ones that are starting is really like, wow, where do we start and how do we get started, right? And that's, I mentioned this earlier, I think it starts with getting your house in order. Figure out how you as an MSP are set up, because you don't want to get hacked, right? You want to be secure first. And then once you're secure, A, you get learnings from that, and B, you don't have to focus on securing yourself that much anymore. Of course you have to, but at least you get to some level of confidence there that you have the basics covered. And then you can start working with your customers, right? With that experience you gathered and the knowledge you have now, and also with an eye on, well, it's a new revenue stream you can create to actually work with your customers. So I definitely encourage every MSP to get your house in order. And again, we have fantastic resources with our partner program that we share with everybody that will help you on that. For the mature MSPs, it's all about figuring out where does the risk lie for individual customers. So they have a more sophisticated, more nuanced conversation with their customers, right? And often these are, say it's a regional bank or something where regulation comes into play, where the conversation might get a little tougher because now you have auditors that need to see things. But most of the conversation there is going in a way that, well, what is the risk to that customer? And you do a risk assessment first, right? And there's tools for that we have, where you go through a questionnaire, for example, and you, in the end, you get this risk map where you see, oh, wow, I have problems with access control, right? We got to fix that first. So you see different areas in this risk map, and then you can develop a program of, okay, how are we going to secure that client? And it's more comprehensive to what I said earlier in terms of, well, make sure you have updated software and EDR. That's part of it. But what happens to all your SaaS products you're using, right? Your Dropbox, your HR system in the cloud, all these kinds of things, are those secure, right? Okay, let's look at that. So you're getting much more nuanced on all those different areas and figuring out what do you do to really secure the client, satisfying the compliance requirements, but also making sure that the customer is really getting more and more secure. And you put a program in place where over time they get more and more secure, because again, with the ransomware attacks, of course, they're going after the low-hanging fruit. But if you are in the space of, say, a financial institution or a healthcare provider or something like that, it's still interesting for their ransomware groups to go after you, because you're a more lucrative target and you're more likely to pay because, well, you want your data back. You don't want to get in the news with having exposed data or exfiltrated data, right? So there's all kinds of other dynamics playing there. But whether you're new or whether you're an established security, or you have an established security practice for your MSP, there's more work and there's more money to be made.
Yeah, I think that has to be not only the upside and the positive message to the MSPs, new and mature alike, but also the positive reinforcement of we may be losing this now, but we can win this battle. And I think that if they're armed with information and the right tools and they educate customers, the MSPs can and will have a vital role to play in this. And history will be, I hope, pretty kind to the MSP community who participated globally to safeguard their customers.
Yeah.
Just in closing, Raffy, I want to mention that the report also does have some pretty good data around kind of the more significant security events that happened in 2021. And it also seems to be identifying some of the larger or more noteworthy ransomware groups that we saw activity from last year, including ones that targeted MSPs and their customers. So definitely something that would, I hope all the MSPs go and download the report and take a look at that and be armed with that information.
Yeah, I think it's actually super interesting. It's at what you just mentioned is like a one-page summary of like, here's at the top groups that were active, right? And while people might say, "Oh, come on! Why would I read this?" Well, it is actually quite interesting because you see a little bit of a trend of what should you be prepared for, right? And how is this actually looking, and making it much more tangible. So I enjoy just looking through that page and like, oh wow, interesting. There's a lot going on out there, and it's really a professional business really that has been built around these different ransomware groups and activities, which is just fantastic or fascinating to some degree, and obviously scary on the other side, right?
Yeah, well, I think it was The Art of War that said, right, know your enemy. So this should be minimum table stakes for all MSPs, is to be armed with this information, to understand the opposite side and what they are trying to do to you and to your customers. I think that's just at a minimum something that all MSPs need to be armed with.
Yeah, and if I may point out too, if for the MSPs that have a little bit of a security background and know what the MITRE attack framework is, the team actually mapped these different threat actors into a heat map based on the MITRE attack framework, which is very tangible, because if you look at where most ransomware is active in what areas, or most, I want to say, threat actors, right? And it's not just the ransomware piece, it's how they get in as well. But how they get into the systems and what they're exploiting, you can actually start figuring out how to protect yourself from that. So for the little more advanced MSPs out there, it's definitely super interesting to look at that heat map in the attack framework and figure out where do they have defenses already, and where should they gear them up a little bit, because that's where the biggest bang for the defense buck is really coming in.
Yeah, really important stuff. So we will have a link in the show notes so that you can go and download the report from the ConnectWise website. Go to connectwise.com and you'll find it there. Raffy Marty, General Manager of Cybersecurity for ConnectWise, thank you so much for joining us again, and we hope that you will be with us in the future as you get more of these studies and information that you can share with the community, because I think it's really important that we continue this ongoing dialogue. So very much appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to have a conversation with you, Charles.
Absolutely. And so stay safe, read the report, and arm yourself and your customers with this information. And remember, this is a definitely winnable war. We just have to all do our part. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.